He didn't want to be a part. He didn't want to be a wheeler dealer anymore.
For 14 years, they were the undisputed kings of car TV. It felt like the perfect partnership. You had Mike Brewer, the charismatic car dealer with a knack for finding a diamond in the rough, and Ed China, the gentle giant of the workshop, a mechanical genius who could bring any car back from the dead. Wheeler Dealers * wasn't just a show, it was a worldwide phenomenon built on their incredible chemistry. It honestly felt like it would go on forever. But in 2017, the engine just seized. The partnership that had defined a whole genre of television came to a grinding halt, and the silence that followed was absolutely deafening. Ed China, the man who was the mechanical heart and soul of the show, was gone. All the fans got was a carefully worded statement about creative differences, a vague, unsatisfying reason that did nothing to stop the storm of speculation that blew up online. For years, that was the official line. But it was never the whole story. The questions never went away, the rumors just kept swirling, and the two men who had been best friends, who had built an empire together, went their separate ways. Now, for the first time, we're going beyond the press releases. Mike Brewer is finally breaking his silence, and his side of the story points to a conflict that was way deeper, more personal, and uglier than any of us could have guessed. This isn't just about creative differences. This is a story of betrayal, a broken friendship, and a professional divorce that sent shockwaves through the car world. To really get how huge the split was, you have to understand what they built together. When Wheeler Dealers first hit screens back in 2003, it was a brilliantly simple idea. Mike would find a tired but promising classic car, haggle for a good price, and then bring it back to the workshop. That's where Ed, with his famous orange gloves and calm, methodical style, would dive into the engine, the suspension, the wiring. Whatever it took to bring the car back to life. It was a format that mixed learning with entertainment like no show had before. Mike was the energetic frontman, the dealmaker who walked us through the excitement of the hunt. But Ed? Ed was the calm professor of the garage. He didn't just fix things, he showed you how he was doing it. He made complicated mechanical jobs seem doable for the average person watching at home and inspired a whole generation of home mechanics. His parts of the show weren't just about nuts and bolts, they were patient, detailed masterclasses that became the soul of Wheeler Dealers. Their chemistry was totally real because it was authentic. They weren't just co-workers, they were mates. The banter felt genuine because it was. Mike has talked about how they were the best of friends, with Ed even being godfather to his child. This wasn't some fake TV friendship, it was a real bond. Built over a shared love for cars. They traveled the world together, they laughed together, and they built a global brand from the ground up. The show's popularity just exploded. It went from a UK-based show to a global sensation, eventually setting up a massive workshop in California to dive into the rich American car scene. From a small start on Discovery Real-Time, Wheeler Dealers became an international powerhouse. To the millions of fans watching, Mike and Ed were an unbreakable team at the peak of their careers. But behind the scenes, as the show got bigger and the money got bigger, cracks were starting to show. The bombshell landed on March 21, 2017. A press release from the network, Velocity, announced that Ed China was leaving Wheeler Dealers after 13 seasons. The reason they gave was that he was leaving to pursue other projects. It was the kind of sterile, corporate talk meant to stop people from speculating, but it did the exact opposite. The fanbase had a complete meltdown. How could the show possibly go on without its master mechanic? A few days later, Ed put out his own, more detailed explanation in a YouTube video. In a calm and professional tone, but with a clear hint of disappointment, he laid out his side. He explained that the show's new production company wanted to change the format in a big way. The plan was to drastically cut down the workshop sequences, giving him less time to show his detailed repairs. Ed argued that these segments were the very heart of Wheeler Dealers. He felt they were trying to dumb down the show to save time and money, and he couldn't be part of a show he no longer believed in. Leaving, he explained, was a matter of principle. Publicly, Mike Brewer's first reaction seemed to be one of shock and sadness. He said he was gutted and that he respected Ed's decision to move on. But as Ed's narrative took hold, the damage was done. The story was set. Ed was the purist who walked away to protect the show's integrity. Mike, by being the one who stayed, was seen as the guy who was willing to compromise, the one who chose the network over his partner, but this official story left way too many questions. Why would a production company want to axe the most popular part of its own hit show? If it was really just about creative differences, why did the split feel so cold and permanent? The two men who had been best friends for over a decade suddenly weren't speaking to each other. Fans knew there had to be more to it. Forums and social media just lit up with theories. Was it a personal fight? Did fame and money drive them apart? The creative differences line felt like a convenient cover-up for a much more painful truth. The silence from both of them right after the split just added fuel to the fire. For years, Mike Brewer carried the weight of being seen as the man who let Ed China go. He was painted as the company man, the one who chose the show over his friend. But in a series of frank interviews and podcasts years later, a different, more complicated, and honestly, more painful story started to come out. According to Mike, this wasn't about workshop timings. This was a story about rising tensions, difficult behavior, and a friendship that had been slowly falling apart for a while. Mike has described the final year on the show as being nothing like the fun chemistry viewers saw on screen. He said that Ed became increasingly difficult and angry about how the show was being made. While Mike admitted he had his own frustrations, he claims Ed took his out on the production crew, creating a tense work environment. Mike alleges that Ed's behavior became so difficult that the network, Discovery, basically gave him a choice: either change his attitude or leave. In Mike's version of events, Ed wasn't just leaving on principle, he was leaving because he'd put himself in a corner where the network couldn't work with him anymore. This completely flips the script on Ed being the sole protector of the show's quality. Mike's side suggests a Messier reality, where the stress of making a massive international TV show was taking a huge toll on their friendship and on Ed's behavior. Mike has said that what Ed really wanted was to work less. But Wheeler Dealers, especially in America, was a beast. It meant 17-hour days, 6 days a week, a level of commitment Mike was all in on, but that he felt Ed was starting to hate. This growing divide wasn't just professional, it got personal. Mike has talked about feeling completely betrayed by Ed's public exit video. He felt that Ed made himself look like a martyr while making Mike look like a sellout. The idea that Mike was somehow to blame for dumbing down the show, a claim he fiercely denies, cut him deep. Their very last interaction as partners paints a sad picture. Mike remembers their last time together was in a hotel room in Paris, where they got drunk together. He claims he had just given Ed a gig because Ed needed the money. There was no big fight, no dramatic blow-up. It was just a quiet, sad farewell. They hugged, and that was that. The next thing Mike knew, the YouTube video was live, and the public story was set. They haven't spoken since. This side of the story changes everything. It's no longer a simple argument over workshop hours. It's a much more human, tragic story of a friendship collapsing under enormous pressure. It suggests that the official reason was a carefully managed PR story that hid the deep resentments and personal conflicts that had been building for a long, long time. The aftermath of Ed China's exit wasn't just a shake-up for Wheeler Dealers, it was a brutal and deeply personal nightmare for Mike Brewer. When Ed released his video explaining why he left, the fan reaction was instant and vicious. A huge chunk of the fanbase took Ed's side completely, seeing him as a hero who stood up to a greedy corporation. And in their view, that made Mike Brewer the villain. The backlash was like nothing the car TV world had ever seen. It wasn't just disappointment, it was a flood of pure hate aimed directly at Mike. social media turned into a war zone. Any post Mike made was swarmed with comments accusing him of betraying Ed, of selling out, of ruining the show. He was called a traitor. The story that he had pushed Ed out for his own benefit, or that he just didn't try hard enough to save the original format, became the accepted truth for a loud and angry part of the audience. It got much worse than online trolling. Mike and his family started getting credible death threats. The abuse was no longer just in a comment section, it was a real and terrifying part of his life. He's spoken about how his wife and even his daughter were targeted with disgusting and threatening messages. It got so bad that the police had to get involved. Here was a man who, for more than a decade, had put his heart into a show for car lovers, and now, because of a professional disagreement that had spiraled out of control, his family's safety was genuinely at risk. The personal toll was huge. Mike has been open about how badly this period affected his mental health. Imagine building a beloved brand with your best friend, only for that friendship to fall apart and then be blamed for it by millions of people. Even Ed China, who was no longer speaking to Mike, was horrified by how severe the backlash was. He put out a second video, begging fans to stop the abuse. He admitted that Mike was probably not his favorite person at right now, and knew the feeling was mutual, but he was crystal clear in condemning the threats. He said that Mike had called him over the weekend to tell him what was happening and urged everyone to remember that it was just a TV show. The fact that Ed had to step in says everything about how toxic things had gotten. It was a dark, ugly chapter that showed the worst side of fan culture, where passion turns into a poisonous obsession. The story of Mike and Ed is a powerful reminder of just how complicated these behind-the-scenes relationships can get. We've heard Mike's side, but the story didn't stop there. The wheeler dealer's world kept on turning, and both men carved out new paths for themselves. What do you think? After hearing Mike's perspective, has your opinion on the split changed? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're into the complex dynamics of car shows, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive. In the years after the big split, both Mike Brewer and Ed China started new chapters. Their paths went in completely different directions, but their careers stayed firmly in the car world they both loved. For Ed China, leaving the show was freeing. No longer tied to network schedules or format arguments, he fully embraced his identity as a master mechanic and teacher. He went to YouTube, where he had total creative freedom. He started a series called Ed China's Garage Revival, helping people finish their stalled project cars. This was followed by the even bigger Ed China's Workshop Diaries, which started in 2021. This series was exactly what his fans had been missing: long, detailed, super technical deep dives into mechanical work. There were no fake deadlines or drama, just Ed in his element, patiently explaining everything from gearbox rebuilds to EV conversions. It was a huge hit, proving there was a massive audience for the very content the network allegedly wanted to cut. He proved his point. Meanwhile, Mike Brewer had the massive job of keeping the wheeler dealer's ship afloat. The first mechanic to step into Ed's giant shoes was Ant Anstead, a well-respected car expert and TV host. Ant co-hosted with Mike for 3 seasons, from 2017 to 2020, while the show was in the US. The dynamic was different, but the show went on, proving it could survive. But when production moved back to the UK in 2020, Ant, who had built a life in California, decided to leave as well. This brought in the show's third mechanic, Mark "Elvis" Priestley. As a former McLaren Formula One mechanic, Priestley brought top-tier technical skills and a new kind of energy. With Elvis, Mike has kept the Wheeler Dealers brand going strong, even launching spin-offs like Wheeler Dealers, Dream Car and the recent Wheeler Dealers World Tour. But even with the show's continued success, the ghost of the split has never really vanished. Mike Brewer has stayed incredibly open about it all. He's maintained there was no feud, just a colleague leaving his job. Still, he's also admitted he wishes he were still friends with Ed, accepting the painful truth that their close bond is gone for good. Their relationship is now a distant one, a friendship lost to the pressures of TV, business, and two very different ideas about the show they created together. So, what's the real story behind one of the most talked about breakups in TV history? The answer, like most things, isn't that simple. It's not a story with a clear hero and a villain. It's a messy, gray, and very human story about a partnership that buckled under the weight of its own success. Ed China's reason for leaving, taking a stand against watering down the show's technical heart, is clearly a huge part of the truth. He saw a future for the show he didn't like, and he made the tough call to walk away. His later success on YouTube, built on the very things he was fighting for, proves he was right about his audience, but Mike Brewer's side adds some crucial, painful layers to that story. His account of growing tension, of a partner who was becoming harder to work with, and of the immense pressure they were both under, can't be dismissed. His story is of a man who felt like he was trying to hold a global franchise together while his partner was pulling away, only to get slammed by the public when it all fell apart. The awful personal fallout, especially the threats to his family, shows the dark side of fandom and the real-world cost of these public dramas. In the end, it was probably a perfect storm. The pressure from the network to make the show faster and cheaper was real. The creative gap between a host focused on the brand and a mechanic focused on the craft was real. And the slow death of a once solid friendship, worn down by years of 17-hour days and the pressures of global fame, was also very, very real. There was no single bad guy. There were just two friends, two partners who hit it big together, who eventually realized they couldn't walk the same path anymore. What they built changed car television forever. What drove them apart is a warning about what can happen when passion meets pressure, when friendship meets business, and when the machine you build just gets too big to control. The silence between them today is maybe the most telling thing of all, a quiet reminder of the deep wounds that were left when the wheels finally, and for good, came off.